Welcome, everyone. Thank you for tuning in today into the Room podcast. My name is Saundra Nicholson, and I'm so excited today to have as a special guest a gentleman who I can say is very well seasoned in his field of playwriting. He hails originally from Jackson State, Mississippi, born at Jackson State University. And he and his family eventually moved out to Southern California, where he was raised in Compton, California. And as life would have it, eventually he went on to pursue his education at Cal State Long Beach University, where he majored in radio and television. And as time would go on, submitted a play to the Mark Taper Center Theater Group, which is, if anybody knows about that theater, it's a fabulous opportunity to be able to showcase your work. I'm not going to continue to keep talking. I'm going to present you Mr. David Lee Lindsey, the playwright, and he's going to discuss some of his works that he just recently wrote and put up on stage, and that is 160 Years Walking. I saw that play a couple of weeks ago. Wasn't it like the end of October? Was it the last day when it?
Yeah, the last Sunday.
Yeah. And it was at the Stella Atlet Theater, which was a fabulous play. I mean, I have so many questions I want to ask you about that. But with no further ado, I introduce you to Mr. David Lee Lindsey. Thank you, David.
When you saw it, it was really rocking because we had been running it for like 4 weeks, and it was just picking up momentum as it went through each week as the cast got better and better with it. I was blessed to have a super cast, 2 excellent directors, and they just brought things out in it that I didn't see in it. And the play itself covers, it covers my family's history going back. I took bits and pieces of it, but what I wanted to do with it was to try and write about our history, because when I actually started writing it, it was called 100 Years of Walking, because I started it while I was in college. It turned out to be a whole lot more difficult than I ever thought it would be. That first draft, I had written 70 pages, and the family was still in the Mississippi wilderness. And I figured I needed to come up with a different concept for how to move through history, and that's how I decided to use the 4 different chunks, starting with the end of enslavement, then moving to Chicago, and covering that period from like 1905, 1910, and then jumping to the third one, which is I Dream of Emmett Till, which talks about the effect that his murder had on Black people, particularly my family coming from Mississippi, because we left Mississippi in the 1960s, and I was born in 56, so it just traumatized Black mothers at that time period, and my mother just wanted to get us out of there because there were I have 5 brothers, no sisters, and my parents wanted to get us out of Mississippi, and particularly my mother, when you've got 5 sons in that place, and the youngest one, Jerry, was born out here. So that covers kind of that period from a stream of consciousness standpoint, moving to like about 2010 is the way, because it's a reflection. The writer is reflecting on the history and the impact on his family. And then Suicidal Rabbit picks it up from that time period on to the current time period. And I tried to make it be reflective of things that are happening today throughout the pieces, so that it's not just history, but it's a reflection on how that impacts life today. And I actually started it, like I said, when I was still in college. And the reason I started it is because I didn't feel that because what they typically do during Black History Month is they'll give you a some type of a recital about the life of Martin Luther King Jr. or Malcolm X, typically, or the both of them. And I was looking at it and I was seeing it for about the 20th time. And I knew the story and the history and everything, but I wasn't getting anything new. And more importantly, I didn't feel I was getting a feeling for what people went through and what their lives were like. It's kind of like 100 years from now if they talk about this time period and they do stories on the life of President Barack Obama or LeBron James. Yes, they have great lives. Yes, they're great people. Yes, I love them. But got nothing to do with my life, how I live my life today, and what the people I know are going through. So that was the impetus for why I wanted to do the play. Of course, I didn't think it would take as long as it did to get it to work. It was I've probably written about 30 hours worth of actual dialogue to get it down to the 2 hours. So it took a while to make it work.
I there are certain things about that play that stands out that's very pivotal for me. One of the scenes was when when they were getting ready to, it's a couple of scenes I want to discuss, but one of the scenes that really stood out to me is the decision to leave or to stay now that slavery was over. And the slave owners, I need hands. I remember that song, I need hands, I need hands. And he, his theme was, it was using it as a bargaining chip. Where are you going to go? It's not like you have any place to go. And they didn't know where they were going to go, but they knew that the mom, the dad, and the daughter didn't want to stay. What I loved about how you wrote that scene is how the son was like, what are we going to do, Dad? Where are we going to go? I'd rather stay here. Even as horrible, I'm sure had they had been treated, because we all know about something about slavery, is that you still had one person that did not want to leave. And the mother made a very pivotal statement where she says, we're still a family. We're still together. Whereas she was comparing them as to other families who were ripped apart. And as I can imagine, as for a mother, she's like, no, I don't want to lose my babies. I want us all to leave here because this is like hell for us. I just appreciated you writing that scene because that was a very real scene for anyone who could just step back. I've always said, I don't have any kids, but I've always said, man, if I had a son, I don't know if I could raise my kid in America because we see and that's in modern times. So I can only imagine how your mother had felt when she was raising you all, and you showed that in that scene. Can you elaborate a little bit more?
Well, what I wanted to do at that point is we kind of look at it, particularly us who live in the West in the U.S. or the North and we assume that everybody at the end of slavery left the South.
Right.
But we've never been at a point in this country where 50% of Black people lived outside of the South. I think in like the 1980s, it reached like 43% lived outside of the South, but it's been reversed because, first of all, the North didn't want us. So you were going someplace that they didn't want you just about as much as they didn't want you in the South. And then there was the big unknown, and then they put in so many obstacles to you leaving the South. I wanted to try and capture that. And also, I had a reflection in my mind about when I was like about 16, we went back to Mississippi. And I remember talking to a good friend of my father's who he had known and grown up with. And he said that one thing I can't ever forget is he said he never thought that my father would leave Mississippi. And he said the reason he never thought he would leave Mississippi is because he was so close to my grandfather. He said the two of them were just so tight and so close that he couldn't imagine my father leaving Mississippi. So I tried to capture that emotion of that tear
Yeah.
was what was driving.
I love that scene, and I love the decision that they had, because that was a hard decision for the mother, the father, and the sister to leave their son behind, knowing they didn't know if he was going to get murdered. They didn't know, and so we never really think about those kind of things. We always look at it as, okay, they left, but you're right, not everybody did leave. And then when they left, did they slave master? Because that was another thing. He was like, I'll give you a place to stay, but you have to pay. And I know something about sharecropping because my family from the Delta, Isola, Mississippi, to be exact, and they grew up on the plantation. So I heard about the sharecropping stories and how that went. With 100 Cities Walking, also another part of that stood out to me about the play. I like how you took it to different scenes where, okay, now it was like the next generation and they were living in Chicago, and how the two sisters, that was funny, how the two sisters, one loved her dad and the other one was like, yeah, whatever, that's your daddy. And how she was, one had this attitude like, I can't stand these people. I got to clean their toilet. I got to clean this. I got to clean that. And she developed a tough exterior because she saw like these are some no good people. Whereas
the white people who she was working for.
Yeah. So she was, So she had an attitude like, I can't stand these folks.
Yeah.
And the other sister, I guess she, I sense that she was like the younger one. She seemed a little bit more softer. But it was just funny how you wrote that mother and father scene. That was like really hilarious. How did you come up with that? Was that based off of your family or just people that you knew?
Well, my family kind of dispersed over time from Mississippi to Indianapolis to Chicago to Detroit to DC. A few of them went to Oakland, and of course we came to LA. And it didn't happen all at once. It happened over time. So there was that. I wanted to capture that movement of the family, that not everybody left Mississippi at the same time, but there was that migration out. And I had a lot of relatives who live in Chicago who talk about they would go down to Mississippi during the summer. The Black people would send their kids to Mississippi during the summer for them to spend their summer down there with other family. So you had different attitudes within the family itself on how to deal with that pressure that you're getting in the cities, and that pressure cooker effect on you that impacts one person differently than it does another. The older sister is just killing her. The younger sister is able to deal with it more and look for the future and kind of use education as a way out of that situation. So it's kind of how each of them handled it differently. And also being younger, she was in a better position at the family time, because typically you have more wealth and more that you can focus on the younger ones than you do on the older ones, particularly when you've got a large family. So she kind of had more opportunity too by being the younger one, in the birth order. Is
right.
How I saw it. And,
right.
And she's more sympathetic to her mother's pain of having been a slave. And the older sister is more focused on her pain today, what she's dealing with in 1908.
Wow. I like how you cleverly presented the Emmett Till story, because one of the things you were making it like, oh, he wouldn't have did that. We know better. He knew better not to, whistle to a white woman, to a Caucasian woman. I like how you presented that, because the way that was like, oh, we wouldn't do that. We know better than that. They're lying. How did you decide to present that element to the story? Because we really don't hear it from that point of view like that, but I like the way how you intricately tie that in.
Well, it's been a thing that really bothered me is, growing up, when I would hear the story is that it was assumed that he whistled and you're not, again, having my parents growing up in Mississippi, father, my grandfather was a sharecropper, so he grew up in the backwoods, Mississippi.
Mhm.
And my mother would visit the backwoods, even though she was from Jackson, because you got all family out there. And that's just, Black people aren't going to do that.
Right.
And it was just, why did the media and society at large just buy the lie of the people who killed him that he did whistle? That was just something that's always bugged me. So it's just a question of how do you dramatize it?
Mm-hmm.
And that was the big problem I had was it can't just be a lecture. It
Right.
has to be dramatized, and it has to have a arc to the story, arc to the characters, a conclusion that gives them more information than when they started to see the play, and also make it more knowledgeable, but still try and be accurate to the facts and events that occurred. And I think the biggest thing, to me, the biggest takeaway from that is that while this part of Emmett's family said he whistled, and that's the part that everybody's in the media, 60 Minutes, wherever you want to go, focus on. But you had the other part of his family who said he didn't whistle and had to flee Mississippi, and no one talked about that. No one mentioned that. And that's what I wanted to show and kind of put the media on trial, that you are so focused on diminishing the severity and how horrible this thing was to try and say that he wasn't. Because I know the first thing that I'm sure that someone who's a down hard Mississippi white bigot is going to say is, if that boy didn't whistle, he wouldn't have got lynched. That's the first thing they're going to say. And that's what I wanted to be able to take away, is that he didn't whistle. And
Exactly.
the thing the impetus for writing the play.
Yeah, that was that was a powerful scene, because as I was watching it, and I was thinking, like, I've never heard nobody present that, because that's what they always say. Oh, he whistled. But when you said that's something he knew better, they knew better. Yeah. During that time, it's like, you wouldn't do that. That's a death sentence, basically. Yeah. So I like how you incorporated that to bring that to the forefront, like people think about it. This is not that, because they knew better. They knew the times, basically. Yeah. Like then, and even still now in some places, not to go through certain neighborhoods. They call them sundown towns, because you could possibly wind up deleted. So I thought that was clever. Moving on to when you brought it up to today's time, I love that scene because it dealt with what a lot of people feel about the two different parties that we have. And when it comes to our politics, Republicans and Democrats, why should we move this way when we haven't seen any results from this particular party over so many years? And then, well, why should we stay here and continue to work for the man? Because we still ain't making that much progress financially, just working over here. Yeah. I like it because it was when I sat there, and some things I personally resonated with, like, I understand where he's going with this. Why did you incorporate that and the way that you did in the 160 years of walking?
When when I first wrote it, Suicidal Rabbits, that piece, the idea came from when I was in college. I was working part-time in Wilmington. I studied play in Long Beach, but it was Wilmington. And the younger worker who starts making, he has his perspective and doesn't take it as seriously. And there's some things in there. I was that younger worker, and I was working with an older guy who was about 15 years older than me. And he actually talked about in his dreams working, picking up boxes in his dreams. The work was affecting him so much, and he would toss and turn, and his wife would, tell him, what's going on and things. And it started from there, and it changed over time. It was originally more like kind of a waiting for Godot, and then it started evolving and picking on the social things that are happening over time and today. And I wanted to show, I still wanted to have that hope that young people have. The younger guy is like 20, early 20s. And A View from the Inside, the one that's set in Chicago, the younger daughter is like 17. So I still wanted to have that hope that youth has, and have them able to express it, and they're still trying to, change the world. And then you've got the older ones who've been kind of beat up by the world. In the case of A View from the Inside, it was the older sister. In the case of Suicidal Rabbits, it's the older worker who's like 35, 40-ish. And they've been through it. But I still wanted that hope of youth, that drive to come out at the end of those two. So that was kind of a dynamic that I worked with both. In a lot of ways, they're the same storyline, but told in a different setting and a different perspective.
Right.
That youth has hope. And I mean, people may say, I'm 68, I ain't young. And where does that hope come from after being knocked down so many times? But when you're young, you got to have hope. You got to have that feeling that you can change the world,
right,
as bad as the world may be.
Right. Right.
And that was the thing I was trying to capture with it.
Right. I like how you wrote and the energy of the actors, because that younger one, he was, picking up those boxes, and he was like, man, even he had a reality check. He had a reality check because he was like, come on, man, we got to do this job. We got to do this job. Come on, Lou, it's all right. Whereas the other guy, he was like, I can't keep doing this. I'm ready to get up out of here. But he started asking him that question when he asked, so if you can get another job, what haven't you? And he said, well, I have tried. And then he started questioning it. He had to think like, man, what am I doing? Is the situation is going to change? And towards the end, because the wall. And, I was thinking, okay, is the wall going over the wall? I'm like, are they talking about suicide? Or is it just leaving and searching for greener pastures? And so it was interesting. I really enjoyed that play. What do you think, where do you see yourself going now with 160 years? And I want to talk about the other plays you've done too, but this is the one that I've seen. Yeah. Where do you see yourself going with it now?
Well, I'm talking to a couple of theaters. I'll see what happens there. They haven't gotten back to me. And maybe I've possibly, some people have talked about possibly doing kind of maybe tone it down a little, but high school kids. Since there's such an attack right now on Black history that's happening across the country, where they don't even want us to talk about the pain and trauma we've been through. So maybe that can become a route too. So right now I'm not really sure. I did contact a lot of theaters in the LA area, California, the regional theaters in Northern California, the adjacent states, and I got really no reply except for two. So I was a little disappointed in that regard, that there isn't interest in Black works, which is kind of very sad.
You know, in my opinion, and maybe it's, I mean, tone it down where I thought.
Well, for high school kids.
Oh, for high school.
Right.
Okay, well, I mean, okay, but I just feel like, I mean, yeah, you can do that. I mean, if you're trying to get it into, I guess, a high school arena.
Right.
But if
some tweaking.
Yeah, okay, right, I get it. Sometimes you may have to go a different route in order to get in the space that you're trying to get into. So I understand that.
Yeah.
But when I look at it, I just like, oh, this needs to be like traveling.
Yeah.
This needs to be on bigger stage, because it was just that good. The acting was good. The directing, I felt like, was phenomenal.
And Justin did a super job.
What's her name?
Veronica Thompson and Justin Lord did super jobs.
Oh, they did a fabulous job.
Yeah.
I mean, I want to see it again, but that was the only night I was there at closing night. They did a fabulous job. Moving on from there.
I said in the cast, everybody.
Oh, everyone. Everything. The music, the cast, the prop, the set. Everything was nice. I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was, in fact, I remember going back to work telling some of my coworkers about it, and they were, they were of the other persuasion, and they were like, "Really? Is it still going?" And I was like, "Well, no, it's over with now." But moving on from 160 years. Prior to you even putting this play up, you had written other plays, and you were part of the Blacksmith Writers Crew, which was with the Mark Taper Theater. Can you expound on that for me?
Yeah, I started with the Taper, and I think it was 92. I'm really bad at dates. They had the Mentors Playwrights Group first, and that was they had got a lot of funding for to try and develop new playwrights, and they had instructors come in from like Yale and other Ivy League schools to teach us, and I really made a lot of progress in that over those 2 years. And I had a play, The Dream Gone Wild, which was heavily considered for the Taper main stage, but they didn't go to it. They did like 2 workshops of it and 2 or 3 readings of it, but ultimately they went in a different direction. And then the time at the Mentor Playwrights stopped. And 2 years later, Lee Richardson started the Blacksmiths Writing Group at the Taper, and he asked me to join them. And I developed a couple of works during that time. One of them was Of Gods and Super Gods, and the Taper was very interested in that. They decided to go with another play from England, Dealer's Choice, but they wanted to option Of Gods and Super Gods. I ended up getting an agent, and that's another story. We can talk about agents and Hollywood stuff maybe when you invite me on next time. But the agent really ruined my relationship with the Taper, and it was never the same. So there were a lot of hits and misses, a lot of really good work that people really loved. We would do like readings and workshops, blacksmiths would, at the Los Angeles Theater Center, at their big theater. I think it's like 500 people, something like that. And we would fill it for like the weekend for, 3 or 4 days. So it was a big thing at the time. And I made a lot of progress in my writing. And it's tough to get your work done. There's such a limited opportunity for writers in general to try and get your work seen, because in Hollywood, they don't even look at your work if it's unsolicited, which is the same as from a writing standpoint. It would be like if you went to General Motors and applied for a job, you go to Universal and apply for a writing job, and they tell you they don't accept unsolicited work. It would be like General Motors saying we don't accept job applications ever, and Universal doesn't accept unsolicited work ever. So you've got that barrier to break, and most of your regional theaters have adopted that same stance. So it really creates an impenetrable wall for Black writers. And the concept of the wall, although I applied it in Suicidal Rabbits and also mentioned it in the other 4 works of 160 Years of Walking, that concept of the wall actually came from trying to get work seen in Hollywood and in the theater. That's where that concept of the wall came to me.
No, go finish your point and I'll answer.
Okay. And I was just saying that the way it's set up is that you can't approach them unless you have an agent. And the only way you can get an agent is if you've sold something to either a major regional theater, Broadway, or Hollywood. So you're caught in that catch-22, where a Hollywood theater won't look at your work unless you have an agent. An agent won't look at your work unless you've sold something to Hollywood or a theater. And for us as Black people, it forms an impenetrable wall. For others, they have the social network, which gets the work done. They get their work done. They can contact people. It's funny because when I was in college at Long Beach State, I was trying to, like I said, I wanted to be a sitcom writer. That was my whole goal. So I was reading these books on how do you become a sitcom writer? How do you get a job in Hollywood? And literally, it said, call your uncle. And I'm thinking, my uncle doesn't work in Hollywood, so I can't call him. And other books would say, contact so-and-so through your, talking social networking things, or a friend who works in Hollywood. And I thought that's the most BS in the world, is what I thought at the time. So, when you're young, you're like 20, you think you can do anything in the world. I called up agents. I called up, the studios, and they said no. So I called up agents to send my work to them, since the studio said you had to go through an agent. I got no's. So again, you're young, you're gonna do it. I didn't have a car, but my brother Jimmy had a car. He had a Celica, super nice car when you're young. And Jimmy's the type of older brother, who believes super in his younger brother. You got those people like, my younger brother can do anything. If he can walk through that wall, totally believe. That's what my brother Jimmy is, and his belief in me when it comes to writing. So we went to these agencies, knocked on the door, and they said no, except for one. So I went in there, told them I wanted to, drop off my play if they would look at it in consideration. And the woman who was up front, because the way people become an agent is you start off as a receptionist or something and you work your way through. So she decided she would look at my work and, possibly take me on. So I gave it to her. I spoke to her like 2 weeks later, and I never forget her words. She asked me, "Can I make it blacker?" And I'm thinking on the phone.
Are we having
I'm not a black
an American
person on this
moment?
phone. What does she mean by blacker? And she said, "Can the father beat the wife? And can the son be in a gang?" And that was her concept of making it blacker. And that I've had agents twice. The second one will take longer to explain. That's messed up my relationship with the taper. But that ended her representation of me because I just
Couldn't go.
could not
Right.
deal with that.
Good for you. Wow, that's that. You know that movie was American Fiction,
Yeah.
where it's that's. Can you make it more what they deem as black? Oh my goodness,
Yeah.
that's crazy, and that was way back then. Do you think now? I want to let you know, every hour, Instagram starts counting down on me.
Okay.
Because the conversation is interesting, we can come back in. I'm just letting you know. So if I go like this, that's because it's counting down. All we'll do is I'll send the invite and you just come back in. And we can continue. That is if we haven't finished within 15 minutes, because there's so much other stuff I just want to like get into right now.
Okay.
So with that being said, do you know, now today you see more writers, more of us are, you know, we're getting our stuff done, we're getting it made, and yet it's still that wall that you mentioned. It's still, because I have friends who are filmmakers, who are writers, they're producers, and I've heard different stories, and they're great writers, and they try to dummy you down, basically. Yeah. What do you think that we as a community, I'm talking about us, I'm not talking about anybody else, can do to get our stuff done, get it out? I mean, you know, I know how, you know, they used to call it the Chitlin circuit, I guess, came to perform, for lack of a better phrase right now. Do you think that we have to start putting ourselves in spaces where putting up our plays at the churches, putting them in the park? I mean, they have Shakespeare in the park. You know, I've never seen one of our plays in the park. You know, I'm just saying, do we have to go those routes? And people, we spend money on the movies. Hey, we spend money on Netflix, Hulu, whatever. Do you think we have to go those routes to get our work out there? And by word of mouth, somebody happens to see, like, man, this is really good, this needs to be on a bigger stage. Do you think those kind of things can work for us? Have you thought about putting 160 years on film?
I've thought about it. If someone's interested, I'm interested in it. We're in a very difficult spot right now as Black people. One thing I tell people is that we are probably economically poorer today as Black people, as a percentage of the wealth in this country, than we were before civil rights. And we don't, and the reason for that is because I can remember when there were big Black insurance companies, big Black banks. There was some manufacturing going on that I would hear about in the 70s and the 60s. With the coming of civil rights, we integrated politically, we integrated economically, and white people did not integrate with us. And when we were able to walk through the front door, no longer having to go through the back door, when we did that, because we were open-hearted and wanted to be a part of everyone together, Black businesses suffered because white people didn't do the same thing. So we are really at a capital deficit, heavily, Black people in the United States. but it's a different world. You've got Nollywood in Nigeria, which is coming on very strong. You've got a strong film industry in other countries in Africa. South Africa has a strong film industry. So it may actually become necessary for the development of film and television in Africa, particularly the brothers and sisters who have the direct connections because they're immigrants who can leverage that, and maybe some wealth comes in to help us, the ones who are descendants of slaves here, because it's a capitalistic situation. We don't have the capital. And we have the stories, we have the talent, but we don't have the money to make it happen. And even though, and again, being 68, you have that perspective, even though the pie gets larger in the sense that there used to only be two networks, ABC, NBC split in two and became NBC and ABC. There was NBC Blue and NBC Red. Then you had Fox who came along, the Fox network. And I remember when I was in college, the teachers telling us, oh yeah, there are plenty of opportunities for Black writers and Black filmmakers and Black camera crew and everything, because it's just the talent wasn't there, and that's why you guys weren't hired. And that with the coming of these other networks, the Fox network, the Channel 5 networks, I forget what they were called, Paramount Network, then you had Direct TV and all of these things, and that there would be plenty of jobs and opportunities for you, talking to us as the Black students. Then you have today, you've got the streaming networks and YouTube and all of these things, and Netflix and everything. But while the pie gets larger, ever larger, the percentage that we get of the pie doesn't change. So we're in a curious situation where we're watching an explosion happen on storytelling and television shows and all this stuff happening. But the number of Black people who have the wealth and the means to put these things out there doesn't change. We're 15% of the population, but we're probably, I think it was like 1 or 1.5% of people who actually write in Hollywood. And that's not saying that they're able to make a living of it, but actually write. And those percentages don't change. So we're in a strange situation where the industry is exploding, but our percentage stays the same. And that's what I mean by we don't have the economic ability to do the things that would need to be done. And why I say we're poorer than we were before civil rights as a people in America.
This is a conversation I've had many of times with different people. And of course, I am the product, I'm Generation X. So I am the product of coming from the baby boomer. I'm Generation X. However, again, like I said, part of my family still is in Mississippi. But what I think is, I understand the whole civil rights movement, why it had to happen. However, we had the Black Wall Street, we had Rosewood, we had Allensworth, we had all these Black towns that were prosperous.
Yeah.
And, what happened, I think the reason why they passed the Civil Rights Act and all that is because they were looking at, we can make money. Because we were growing economically. We had banks. Yeah. We even, they even have an airport. Yeah. So I think they said these people know how to prosper. And I have a reason for that, why we are that way. But these people prosper, and they looked at it as, if we block them out, they're going to become a very successful empire, because we came from empires. We came, Over the last several years, I've really did a lot of research and just studying who we were as a people, where we come from. There's a debate about us being here before, after, which we were. Our people were here before the slave trade, but even those who came over during the slave trade, I've done extensive research on that and still doing it. But, they saw a money making opportunity, which is why they prospered. If I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. Claude Robinson. Years ago, I think it must have been the 80s. He like a financial expert, and he was talking about then, if we didn't get it together, he said we was number 2 in America at this time. This was like in the late 70s, early 80s. He says, when we don't get it together, the other immigrant populations are going to come here, and we're going to be 4th, and they're going to be up above us. That was a prophecy that manifested itself. I mean, even though we're more educated than a whole lot of people, we have, it's so funny, we have more education, but then at the same time, or maybe, at the same time, not enough entrepreneurship or enough businesses. And so I could see how we fell behind. But with that saying, I want to give an opportunity for anybody who has questions. If you have any questions, if you're open to it, David, I would love to. If you have any questions, this is your opportunity. If you have a question you want to ask David, now you can ask a question, and you can either put it in the chat and I'll ask it for you, or I can bring you into the room and you can ask him directly yourself. One thing that I want to ask you, when it comes to writing a play, is it difficult to write a play?
It's a first of all, it's a talent. If you have that talent or that mental, leaning, or however you want to call it, then it's not going to be difficult. It would be a whole lot of work, and then you go through discovery processes. But it's more like if you had a talent. Like I played clarinet and saxophone in high school. I was horrible. I love music, but I was horrible because I didn't have the talent. So if you have that innate talent, then it's just a matter of working and developing it. If you don't have that talent for dialogue, then it's not going to work for you. But you may have talent for writing a novel. You may have talent for being a scientist. It's finding that talent within you and working toward it. It's kind of like I always hear people talk about find a thing you love and go with that and follow it. I didn't grow up watching the theater. I didn't care for the theater. I didn't care for writing growing up. But I found out I had a talent for it. And I decided I'm going to follow my talent rather than my love. I found out that I have a talent for programming computers and for conceptualizing data. I didn't love computers. They were just getting started. There was these weird things. I didn't care for them, but I found out that I had a talent for it, and I went with that talent. You still have the things that you love and that you want to pursue, but I always tell people you will get much further in life finding out where your talent is, and then appreciation of that area than you will if you follow your love. Because want to know what my true love was? I wanted to be the power forward for the Los Angeles Lakers or the middle linebacker for the Los Angeles Rams. And I didn't have a body for it. When I graduated from high school, I weighed 125 pounds.
Oh, you was a little guy.
I had the thorough love the thorough desire, the thorough wish. And to be honest, I would jump this writing right now if I could be the power forward for the Los Angeles Lakers. But that's not my talent.
Right,
So you go
right,
with your talent.
right, right. That's cool. That's awesome. Um, let's see. We have, I think, because came on like around 105, but I'm gonna ask like another question. And that is what do you, who would you like to work with?
I don't know, my mind just went totally blank when you asked that question.
Some people, they get stuck on that when I ask them that question. Who in the industry would you like to work with? Or what kind of, oh, go ahead.
Just off the top of my head, I would say Denzel Washington, because I would really love to see him play the lead role in The Dream Gone Wild, because it's about a very powerful black man executive and his relationship with his subordinate, who's a white woman who's 20 years younger than him, and his perspective on being black and looked on as a sellout, but to him, he's not. And Denzel Washington, it would be a fabulous role for him.
Yeah,
So
he
that would
can play that role.
Yeah.
I think might as well put it out there. Hey, Denz.
Yeah, if you're listening, I got a great role for you. It'll win you an Oscar.
You never know who may watch this later on.
Yeah.
That's cool. In terms of a female actor, who would you like to work with? Or who wouldn't you mind writing something for?
Viola Davis, I love her work. She's that's fabulous. Yeah.
Now, that's interesting because I do know someone who knows her. I'll send them when I'm like, here, send this over.
Actually, Dream Gone Wild, there's a black woman who is his antagonist for the black executive. She's also executive too, and they've had like a 30-year friendship relationship. So if we could get Denzel and Viola, hey, it'll rock.
Get them once again together.
Yeah.
To get them again once together. Well, okay, let's go there with this now. You know, why? Because I felt like sometimes in Hollywood, when they write stories about us, you know, the brother and the sister got to be antagonized. They got to be at each other. Why can't we just get along on the screen? You know, I mean, think about it. How many love stories have you seen? It's always been something, or it's like that tension is always not a happy situation. I mean, or they struggling. I'm like, who wants to see that? You know, so why do you? Why is that? Why do they, you know, well, I have my views why Hollywood constantly perpetuates that, because I think it's a threat to see us to get along and to unite. And I think that's the biggest reason why that that narrative is pushed a lot, you know, to keep, if we can be fighting one another, then they think, oh, well, they'll never come together. But, you know, when you bring the two together, then that's building a strong family, a strong nuclear network. And so I think that's probably one of the main reasons why we haven't seen that much of that in the media.
It's easier to focus on doing a negative story than to do a positive one. And I think that's, you know, when you don't understand the people, it's easy to focus on something negative. I think that's what drives a lot of it.
Your knowledge, your journey, what it is to be a writer, what your challenges were, and some of your victories, because at the end of the day, you have managed to put up, to still get in spaces. Some people can't even get in the door for anybody to look at their work, even though it may not have been on as often as you would like. You still were, in some cases, were able to get in. So that's always a plus. You know, you take the wins and then you build on that. And I love the fact that even at 68, you're still pursuing your dream. You're still writing. And We are the original storyteller. Well, within that being said, I want to thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule and coming on Into the Room podcast and joining us